kind of good. All right, good morning. All right, so we are now Revelation part 3, lesson 5. We have gotten to the place now where we are really starting to layer things. Are you starting to see the process here? For those of you who were with me in Daniel, the study of Daniel way back when we did it, this was a great opportunity for you to see how valuable moving from your foundational studies, whatever they have been, and as you keep moving along, you just keep layering your insights and understanding, and how much having something else already accomplished under your belt, it adds to, it layers on what you're doing now and gives insight and better illumination. If nothing else, I think it will demonstrate to you why it is for someone like me who's been in inductive Bible study for so many years, I can just reach out there and pull in thoughts, because I've done these things so many times that I see the connection. The value of inductive Bible study is that it does not just teach you a study from the perspective of dropping in, reading a certain storyline, and trying to draw a personal application for the day. Rather, what Precept is really, I think, highly valued in my life for is it teaches me the doctrines that connect the thread. You start pulling that thread, you pull on that thread, and you can bring forward, or you can trace it backward into its origins or to where it started, and so that you get the doctrinal truth behind it. And once you get the doctrines down, then you begin to understand how the whole Bible really fits together like a puzzle. So that's kind of what we were looking at this week. We've been in Revelation for months and months, right? Last week we did the Matthew 24 to begin with. This week we did Daniel, but we looked at 4 different chapters of Daniel, and we did 2 Thessalonians. So basically, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's like doing 4 studies this week, plus we did last week 1. So that's 5 Bible studies that you've jumped into and touched on the information in them. And now you're layering that in on top of what we're doing in the book of Revelation. So you can probably understand how this also might be a bit of a challenge for those of you who have never done Thessalonians and have never done Daniel. You are going to have to kind of trust, as we are writing these things down on the board, that we have done that hard work to iron it out, and you probably won't totally you're not really learning it, you're being exposed to it. Does that make sense? There's a difference. If you've done the weeks and weeks of work and you've dug in and looked at all your cross references, done all your highlighting, marked your words, made your list, and your cross referencing, I mean, that's study, right? But what we did this week was more of a drop in to observe for one particular point. Did you recognize what the one thing was that you were trying to look for this week primarily? What was the springboard off of which we began this journey for this week's homework? Well, tribulation and what? Yeah, because how did we get to Daniel? How did we go there? What made us go there? Was Matthew 20. Yeah. And okay, so Jesus makes a statement. Something that was written, he says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of through Daniel, then you're to flee to the mountains, right? And then you go on in that Matthew, and it says, don't go back for your cloaks, don't do anything, just go, flee. So because, first of all, how strong is our authority, right? Jesus says it himself. So Jesus says Daniel is the one he's quoting. So therefore, as an inductive student, about this time frame called the abomination of desolation, which for us, where do we know the abomination of desolation takes place on our timeline? Mid-tribulation, right in the middle of that 3.5, in the 7th trumpet, right? When the 7th trumpet sounds, what has happened in the 6th trumpet? Who went up? The 2 witnesses went up. In the 7th trumpet, who comes down? Satan. So Satan comes down. And then when he comes down, what does he begin to do? Pursue the woman and persecute the woman, right? And then what does the woman do? She flees. So all that then comes to us when we hit this place here in Matthew 24, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of through Daniel, and he says, flee. We know our subject matter for Matthew is what? How do we know that this is going to fit into our revelation? Okay, for one thing, it gives us the information that it's a tribulation and a great tribulation. Now, how do we know that's not just general kind of tribulation? I mean, we all have tribulations in life, right? There you go. That's what I wanted. What are the signs of your coming? Very good. That was exactly what I wanted. You have to go back to the opening of Matthew 24 in that first portion of it there in verse 3, where the disciples come to Jesus and ask him specifically, where he says, what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age, and when, basically. So those were the two questions. And Jesus's response, he flips it and he answers the signs first and then the when later. And the when, what was the answer to the when in 24? Matthew 24. No one knows the day nor the hour. So just be ready, right? But when he talks about the sign, then we have an outline for the book of Matthew. And this is just review. I wrote this up ahead of time so that I wouldn't have to spend a lot of time here. I just want to try to touch on it, refresh your memory where we were last week and how we got to this reference here in Daniel is that Jesus quotes the abomination of desolation. He says it's spoken of through Daniel. So then your clue is, okay, how do you find that? Now, if you do not have inductive Bible study curriculum, how do you find where in Daniel he speaks of this? You Google it. That'll work. It didn't used to be, you couldn't do that, but that'll work. You Google, go online and Google, where in Daniel does he speak of the abomination of desolation? And your computer will tell you, yes. Okay, and if you don't have that particular, you look through for your cross references through what kind of a book? A concordance, a Bible concordance. You look up abomination of desolation and it'll give you all the verses where that's mentioned, and you pick out the ones in Daniel that you think might be it, and you go in and you look at them. And that's what inductive Bible study is all about. It's following the leads, just like a detective, finding where those links are. Once you get there, you have to observe it and say, am I speaking of the same time frame? The way I always phrase it is, are we comparing apples to apples? Because sometimes, for instance, this week, we actually saw a situation where we dropped in Daniel chapter 9, and we saw, was it 9? Hold on, let me look. Where there's, it's in 11, sorry, in 11. When we got to chapter 11, we started with another king, and it was called a despicable person. And it turns out that he's in the wrong time frame, right? He's not in the end time, but boy, does he sound just like our end time king that's going to bring on these things concerning the abomination of desolation at the end of the age. They look so much alike, but you have to then go in and be careful to say, but is it the same person, and is it the same timeline? And hopefully we're going to look to see how that was revealed to us through her taking us into that Daniel 11, so we could look at it and compare the two, but then find the place that was the right king, right? And then you're going to compare those two. What you're looking for when you're trying to make sure you're comparing apples to apples is you're looking for the qualities and characteristics of people, places, and events. And when you're doing anything historical, you want a timeline and say, is this falling in the right place in history? Does that make sense? Yeah. And does that take time? Yes. But that's how you do it. And for someone who's actually a serious Bible student, Kristen had brought a subject up this morning about some conversations going on, and she was saying what do you do? I mean, how do you answer that? I got a little bit stumped, Well, this method of study is, the purpose of it is to train you to be an apologetic kind of a person in your life, to be able to give a defense for the things that you believe. Last week, when we did Matthew 24, there is controversy about how this book breaks down, right? We talked about that a little bit last week, how in Matthew 24 verses 4-8, I have marked them as birth pangs, and I have called that the church age. And one of the things I realized when I was doing homework this week is I found a cross-reference to back it up. Hopefully I'll remember, and I'll share it with you, because I don't remember where it was. I'll have to find it as we're going along. But I found a verse where it actually says this exact same thing, that during that time frame, and it mapped it out just like this one does. So I was really excited about that. That's what's so cool about the inductive process, is once you've kind of got certain things in your head, when you're doing work in other areas and you're trying to compare these apples to apples, you find more clues that either support or refute whatever conclusions you've come to. If your conclusion is wrong, then you look at what what you're seeing there, and you're going, oh, I was wrong. But it's okay to be wrong, right? Isn't it okay if we're wrong once in a while? I mean, it's a journey of trying to figure some of this stuff out. Why is this so hard to figure out? Why is it hard? It's hard. Yeah, because it's hard. Thank you. Yeah, Sarah's got the best answer. It's just hard. Go ahead. What? There's a lot going on. Depending on who you're reading, it's out of sequence, or what's easier is when we're looking back, for instance, at the life of Jesus, right? Why is that easier when we're looking at the life of Jesus and saying, oh, I get it? But when we're looking at this stuff down here, and there you go, it hasn't happened. One has happened, the other hasn't. If it's already happened, you can go in and validate. That's why when you get into Daniel 11, so much of this is simple. Boom, boom, boom. This is this person. This is what they did. This is what the time frame was. This is who the king was. We can check, 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 check. We know exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. So, and we don't have, yeah. You know, what I thought was interesting, what became interesting to me as I was reading it, was the fact that Daniel was given this vision in Daniel 11, I guess it was 11, and it was during their, no, it was all of it was, no, it was Daniel 11:1, and he says Daniel's vision was in the days of Darius the Mede, right? And I'm going, oh, that's interesting. And when we looked at it, he opened with just 2 verses about that particular empire, and then he moved on to a new one. So now he's given future prophecy again. He already has the Babylonian, but remember when he was writing during the days of Babylon, what had not come up yet? Persia. He was still in the Babylonian captivity, and he was writing about Persia and these other kingdoms that will come after. So it's easy to look back and say, oh, I understand, but it is much tougher to look forward. So we do need to be full of grace when we're talking about this with people, and not push too hard. But there are certain things that are absolutes, because as we are laying them out and getting them lined up like we have been, pretty soon it becomes obvious exactly this timeline. It lays out just like we've laid it out. You can't lay it out any other way. So all of this is said to say to you that this process is a layering process. This process requires that you make sure you're comparing apples to apples. It also is a process where you have to give yourself grace to, number one, be wrong once in a while and make the tweak in your head, you know. But also, once you come to understand it, I can tell you one thing. When I have come into insight that, for instance, I've done an outline, I'm going, I'm really convinced that's it. You get this peace, this inner peace of going, I'm confident that I can stand on that. And I wouldn't argue in a way that would be mean, but I would say, let me show you how I came to my conclusion, right? If they're really interested, they'll want to see. And if they aren't, if they're just arguing for the sake of arguing, it's a pointless conversation anyway, right? But it's really fun when you get to talk to Christians about some of these things, because they're really interested. They want to know, how do you know that? Oh, show me that, right? So this has been a fun week, I think. So now we're ready to dig in. So what I did is up here, I've written the outline for the book of Matthew 24. We open in verse 4-8 with the birth pang. I call it the church age. It mentions wars and rumors of wars and famines and earthquakes. And why does he warn them about that? Because he didn't want them to be confused when these kinds of things were going on. But later, the tribulation is going to have wars and rumors of wars, but they're going to be intensified. And so it's like the process of being in labor, which is what he used as an illustration. And that is, you start out with those Braxton Hicks. For a woman, often she's confused. So what does she end up doing? Going to the hospital before it's actually time. How many of us ended up at the hospital and the doctor says, go home, you're not ready yet, right? So that's kind of what Jesus was saying is, look, I don't want you to be confused. There's going to be some things that feel like tribulation when they're happening, but it's not the tribulation, right? So he laid it out. He says there's going to be this time frame that he referred to as birth pangs. And then he says, then tribulation. And he said, and in that there was a list of things. You're going to be killed. You're going to be hated because of my name. Many will fall away and betray one another. There are going to be many false prophets. The one I liked the best out of all of it was basically said, but this gospel of the kingdom. I like that. But so in other words, let me comfort you. Don't get too stressed over this. I want you to understand the gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world, and then the end will come. What is he saying to us when he makes that statement that the gospel will be preached at that time? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear it. Say it again. Yes, he wants everyone to be saved, for all men to be, exactly. And Revelation 14 did the same thing, didn't it? What goes on in Revelation 14 in that segment division, which is the signs? And in Revelation 14, he's going along and he's talking about the dragon and the woman. Then he talks about the beast and the another beast, right? Then you get chapter 14, and what does he do then for a whole chapter? Yeah. And then what follows the 144,000? The great multitude. And then after that, he talks about what? The subject of what? It goes from evangelism to the reaping, right? Where Jesus reaps and then the angel reaps. So in that demonstration, he does just kind of what he's doing here in Matthew 24, where he says, basically, but this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached. That's exactly what is done in the book of Revelation. He makes a pause there and he says, but don't worry, there's going to be a great harvest of lives. And he shows us and demonstrates to us people who are evangelizing. First, it's the 144,000. They don't mention the two witnesses, but we know they're there also. And then followed in the second half of the tribulation are who? The angels who are giving out the gospel. So there's going to be coverage of gospel being presented throughout the whole time. Isn't that an awesome thing that God shows that to us? So here he does the same thing. There's going to be tribulation, but the gospel is going to be preached even in that time. And so that's actually a cross reference to your Revelation 14, that verse 13 and 14 in Matthew 24. And then he stops and says this, then you will see the abomination of desolation spoken of through Daniel. And he says, flee to the mountains, and then a great tribulation. So now we've gone from the first 3.5 years of that tribulation to the second 3.5 when it's called the Great Tribulation. And then he gives us this statement here. He says, a great tribulation such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. Does that sound familiar from our homework this week? Where did we see that almost quote verbatim this week in Daniel? How about 12, chapter 12?
Which is fun because if we go back, we there's certain man in linen that's saying all this. Jesus is quoting himself.
I know it isn't that funny. Yes, that is actually quite humorous. She says Jesus is quoting himself because, right. So when he says a great tribulation such as has not occurred, then is repeated. What does 12:1 say? Somebody read that out loud.
Now at that time, my great prince who stands on the runs, and there will be a distress such as never occurred since there was a nation. And at that time, your people, everyone who has been written in the book, will be received.
Isn't that amazing? So you get almost a word for word. So as we have just observed the tiny bit that we've looked at now, we've compared a couple of Daniel and Revelation verses. We see we're speaking of the same time frame. And in your homework time, you should have actually done some kind of a timeline, I hope, so that you can map it out and you can see you are speaking of the end time, right? And it literally clearly says it there. Okay, so now what we want to do is jump into these cross references, and it's going to be tricky, but all we want to do is pull out the most basic of information, okay? So let's talk about Daniel 9 first. Okay. Daniel 9, and it's 24 to 27. We were taken there because of this quote that was given to us in Matthew 24, okay? And so since it led us forward, now we drop into Daniel 9, 24 to 27, and now we're going to observe what additional information is given to us there. Now, for some of you, the question keeps coming up about the elect and the saints. Who are the elect? Who are the saints? Let me see if I can find mine. Oh, I'm in the wrong one. That's why I want to go here. One of the things that I did was I went to Matthew 24 because we know it's a legitimate cross-reference. Matthew 24 actually gives us those words also, because Jesus is speaking. When is the time frame in which Jesus is speaking? Who is he speaking to? His disciples, and also to the multitudes when they were there, right? The other people there, right? And in Matthew 24, 34, Jesus makes a quote and he says, "And this generation shall not pass away until all these things take place." We talked about it last week. Does anybody remember what we concluded about this generation? What does that mean?
Quality of it. Use the quality and it's not really these people, it's this type of people.
Okay, it's this type. Okay, very good. That's yeah, exactly. Very good. So you merge those two things together and you're saying at that time, that genre of people, this type of people who are, what is their type? The Jewish nation. He was speaking to Israel, right? And he says, and at that time, when it occurs and those Jews see these things happening, that generation shall not pass away until all these things will take place. Now, I looked up the word study on that generation. It means men of the same stock. That's what you were saying, right? A family, ranks of natural descent, members of a genealogy, which is the Jewish nation, the Israel nation. And when you consider the fact that all these things that God is doing in these last 7 years pertains to the fact that God has made a promise to the nation of Israel, that he is going to be their king and they are going to be his people, right? And that he is going to come back and he is going to put them back on their land and he is going to come and have a literal ruling. Chapter 20 of Revelation says he comes and he rules on this earth for how long? 1,000 years on this earth. Then he continues to rule throughout eternity following that. But he has promised them 1,000-year reign on this earth, him as their king, and he will be centrally located in Jerusalem for the nation of Israel. Why? Why the nation of Israel? He made a promise to them. Why do you think he made a promise to them? Are they special? Because he chose them, and he chose them that he might do what then? Glorify himself. He wants the whole world to watch him work through a nation that he supernaturally birthed, that he supernaturally preserved, that he is going to supernaturally reinstate on their land, which he's already begun to do. You know, for 2,000 years, they were not on their land, and no one thought that possible. And there was this new replacement theology in our system that came around through the Christendom, replacing the church with Israel, saying, well, it has to be the church now. But now that Israel's back on their land, we're all going, oh, I see, right? So they are. Right. Right. He's a king, but he's born in a manger, right? Exactly. So God had a covenant to this nation. He chose them so that in the end it would glorify him, that men would look to see how he deals with them and the supernatural work that God does through them, that the whole world would see his power, his glory, his love, his sovereignty over every quality and aspect. Okay, so heaven and earth is not going to pass away, and my words will not pass away. He says, therefore this generation will not pass away. That's what he's saying. Okay, then he goes on in Matthew 24:9, and he says, and they will deliver you to tribulation, they will kill you, flee when you see the abomination. So who did we just say is the you? The Israel nation, the Jews, right? So it's the Jews, when the Jews who are presently living in Israel at the time of the abomination of desolation, when they see these things happen, they're supposed to flee. Well, Revelation shows us a cross-reference to that, the woman fleeing in 12:6, and also in 13:7, it was given to the Antichrist to make war with those saints and to overcome them. So who are those saints? The Jews. Okay, so now you know this generation, the elect, the woman, and the saints, those are all speaking of the Jewish nation. You could pretty much have a default in your thinking, go back to it being speaking about the Jews, and specifically the Jewish nation. Now, in saying that, that does not mean that there are no other people who are outside of the Jewish nation that don't get saved, or that God does not call them his elect or call them his saints, right? We are the saints also. But in the context of Revelation, who is he speaking about? The Jewish nation. Why? Because this is what he's accomplishing. And if Daniel 9 does not prove that to you, I don't know what will. So let's look at Daniel 9 now. And get this started. Daniel 9, we start in 9:24. What is the first thing that's told to us? 70 weeks are decreed. Yeah. For Daniel's, I added that in, people, so that you get the right person here, and his holy city. Okay, that's in 9:24 at the opening. So for those who did not do Daniel with us, this particular verse is so key to understanding who's the elect and who are the saints, right? It really does make sure that you understand he's speaking about the nation of Israel. And then he says, since 70 weeks have been decreed, let's mark that off, 70 weeks, we have to see if we can find these 70 weeks. So then he goes on to explain, that how does this map itself out? Go through and tell me the things that are going to occur in these 70 weeks. Okay, okay. And when does it start? There you go. We got to have that, because we got to have our time references in order to map it, right? So from the issuing of a decree, decree to rebuild Jerusalem until what? Messiah. Who is Messiah, the prince? He's Jesus. And then he said, that's in 9:25. And he says,
That's 7 weeks plus 62.
7 weeks plus 62. So now this coming of Messiah the Prince is speaking of Jesus's triumphal entry. Luke 19 tells us this. It's another cross reference. We're not there. So this is one of those moments you're going to have to trust me for right now, because I don't want to take too much time and go to all these validating references, because truthfully, here's the way this really should work. You should have already done Daniel, because Daniel is your foundation for knowing all this. So for us now, we are as a group dropping back into what we've already done, work we've already accomplished. So for that reason, I'm going to take the liberty this morning of skipping a lot of validating or proof texting of my things that I'm going to show you. I just want to be able to lay it out in a simple timeline that you can see. And for those of you who have more questions, you can always come back to me later and I will help you with it. Or watch the videos. And by the way, I want to say publicly, thank you, Kristen. That was, although it took up a lot of my time, because I had to go back and watch me too, so that I could remember what I said, so that when you ask me about it, I would have it fresh in my head. But honestly, I was telling her after she sent those and I started watching them, I said, I don't even have to teach this week. If you've watched those, how many of you in here watched the videos that she sent out? No, don't tell me. That's sad. Okay, you guys all have to go home and go back and watch. I'm not kidding. They're lengthy because they're a whole class. So you're talking an hour for each one. But she literally takes you through each one of these lessons that you did in your homework. And you get the Daniel teaching of what I taught at that time. So you get the whole background to all of this. So if you still don't follow me when we're done here today, go back and watch them. That it'll clarify everything, because it's done in great detail there. Okay, so this very first point is from the issuing of a decree to rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince. Well, that decree was issued by Persia in 445 BC, and it takes you to Jesus's triumphal entry just before he goes to the cross. That totals, and it says it's 7 weeks and 62 weeks. And how much does that total? 69 weeks. And how many weeks have been decreed? So we have 1 week left. Now, in previous studies, how much is a week? 1 week is what? 7 years. In Revelation, we have these time references given to us concerning these things are going to happen here, right? The 2 witnesses, for instance, they testify for how long? 1,260 days, which is 3.5 years, right? Israel flees for how long? 1,260 days, which is 3.5 years. How much is 3.5 and 3.5? 7 years. So how much time is this? 1 week, 7 years. Is everyone okay with that? Yay. Okay. That's a huge portion of grabbing a hold of everything. One of the questions I had from someone, I don't know if it was here in the evening group, was how far back do we go with the witnesses, the 2 witnesses? How do we know it's not longer than 3.5 years? Because, well, the two witnesses gives us a date, but the 144,000, how do we know they don't go further back? Well, and when are they marked? Well, the marking happens before the earth is hurt. It's in the context of talking about this time frame, and so they can't go back any further than the time frame that's allotted. We're only working with 1 year, which is 7 years. 1 week, which is 7 years. So we know that everything is within the confines of 7 years, from beginning to end. We know in the middle of it that something's going to happen. So that's where we're back to Daniel now. 9:25 told us that from the issuing of the decree till Messiah the Prince was that 69 weeks. And then he says, what happens after that? Messiah is cut off. And what does the cut off mean? What does it mean that Jesus is cut off? And as a matter of fact, it goes on, he's going to be cut off in what? And have nothing. Now, this is an interesting statement, and it had me stumped for a long time. Who thinks they understand what it means he has nothing now? Because we talked about it when I taught this last time. Oh, I know you know everything. Go ahead. Let's let some of these other poor gals. Yeah. Kristen's good. No, you're right. No, Kristen knows. I know she does. Because for one thing, I think it was on the tape. It was on the tape too. Okay. Does anybody remember? What does it mean? What is Jesus coming for? What did the Jews think he was coming for? To be their king. When he came and he got cut off, did he become a king on the earth at that time? There's your answer. He has nothing yet. He has nothing yet. So I'm going to add that on there. Yet. Why? Because he's looking to become a king, right? And he's not happened yet. So he's going to be cut off, which is the cross. So that gives us this piece of information outside of the 69 weeks. They go beyond that and they say, the Messiah is going to be cut off and have nothing. Why? Because his kingdom is not there yet. And then it says, what else happens? Yeah. This was interesting. The people of the prince who is to come will destroy the temple. Its end will come with a flood. Now, when did that happen, and who are all these pieces? Who are the people? No, but that was a good try. Okay, because the question is, they're going to destroy the temple. When did that happen? When did it happen? 70 AD. Who did it? Rome. Okay, so we know Rome did it 70 AD, and it came with an end. And then the last one it says, and to the end what? Oh, interesting. Oh, is anyone else going ding, ding, ding? Back to our Matthew 24, there are going to be wars and rumors of wars, famines and earthquakes. This is the verse that caught my attention this time. And I went, oh, look at there. And he's giving us this information about this designated time frame, 69 weeks, and then the 70th week down here. But then he tacks on extra information. He tells us about Jesus being crucified and about the temple being destroyed in 70 AD. And then he says, and there will be wars and desolations. Does that sound like Matthew 24? Verses, is it 4 to 8? I think that was 4 to 8. It sounds just like, it's almost like a direct quote, because here he said the same thing. He says, these are the birth pangs. And then he literally says at the end of this one, by the way, this is not yet the end, right? But that is not yet the end. And that was in 24:6. Interesting, huh? Isn't that kind of cool? I never caught it before, but that is not yet the end. Tells you that has to be the birth pang era, has to be the church age. And then he actually dropped it in here in Daniel as well, without saying this is the church age, but he's saying that will be a total of 69 weeks from the issuing the decree until Messiah the Prince. But then the Messiah is going to be cut off and have nothing, meaning he doesn't get his kingdom yet. And there's going to be wars and desolations. That's what Matthew 24 tells us. Isn't that cool? I was excited when I saw that this week. That was another little treasure God gave me. To the end, war and desolations. Okay, so that's going to go to Matthew 24, 4 to 8 as a cross-reference there. And so what we have now here is a total of 69 weeks for everything that goes on here, right? Now we're looking for the last 1 week. The 1 week is future. Now we go to Daniel 7. You can see how much I'm scooting past on this, but it's all we want to do is try to target our time frame of that 1 week and see if we can fill in the information there. So in Daniel 7, some of this I'm not going to write on here because I don't want to spend a lot of time, but what we see basically in Daniel 7 is there are a picture for us given to us about 4 beasts, right? And what are the 4 beasts?
Katie, before you move on, can I ask a question about
Sure.
Daniel 9:26?
Yes.
Where it says its end shall come with a flood. Do you think that that's possibly related to Revelations 12:15, where the serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the
No,
woman so that he
no.
might cause her to be swept away with the flood?
No, because the context is when the city and the sanctuary are going to be destroyed. So it's speaking about 70 AD. And
Okay,
what,
I was kind of thinking maybe he's showing the beginning and the end.
yeah, no,
Destroying
but
the city and
that was
sanctuary at the
I
beginning and at the end is the
yeah, I
flood.
get, yeah, totally understand, Amanda, why you saw that. Did you all hear her? Yeah, okay. So, but it says and, you see the and, the conjunction there, right at the very first word. Circle that and highlight it. That's a conjunction. It connects it back to the sentence before, and it's speaking about the city and the sanctuary that's going to be destroyed. What's very interesting to me then is also this, that that city, it was destroyed in 70 AD. And then what happened to Israel, the nation, also at that point? They were dispersed. That began the years where they were off their land for 2,000 years. And that city and that sanctuary did not exist for 2,000 years. We still don't have the sanctuary, right? They don't have a temple yet. They do have their city back. But talking about ending it with a flood, I think that's what it's.
Go back and look at the word flood. The word isn't actually about water.
Okay.
Because this also goes with Daniel 11:22. It's the exact same Hebrew word, but it's about overflowing and overwhelming.
Overwhelming. Oh, okay, good.
It's not literally about water.
It's not
Very
about
good.
water. Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
So mark it, make yourself a little note, do a word study on that word flood there. And then she
Okay.
said, connect it to,
78:58.
okay, but, and what is the cross-reference? 11 what? 11:22. Mark it with 11:22. Can I borrow your pen? I'm going to mark that on mine. I like that. Thank you. 11:22. See, the teacher can learn. That's good. Well, I hadn't looked that word up, but I had already connected because I saw the obvious word and, which is a conjunction, and that tacks it on to the previous thought, which was about the sanctuary and the city being destroyed. And so I actually took it as the definition that you came up with without looking at the word study, but the word study would have done it too. I love that. The word is flood. If she's looking in verse.
The number is 7858 Hebrew. So it's H7858. And it's in Daniel 11:22 also. The exact same word. It's only 2 places.
Yeah, he talks about flood forces.
Mm-hmm. Pardon?
I think it'll say overflow there.
Yep. Okay, good. All right. So let's move on now. So we have the 4 beasts, they are 4 kings, right? And I'm going to put on here /kingdoms because a king rules over a kingdom. Okay. And we're going to see that that's going to be explained to us in 7:17 and in 23. So go back to 7:17. We see these great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings who will arise from the earth. And then go down to 23. Thus he said, the 4th beast will be a 4th what? kingdom. So what I did on my observation worksheet to help me make sure I understand kings and kingdoms are related is I just drew a pencil line from kings up here where the interpretation is given about the 4 beasts, that it's 4 kings. And then I drew a line all the way down to the next interpretation in verse 23 where it says that it's a 4th kingdom. And that way, and this is where we've talked about this many times, but you have to be able to kind of vacillate back and forth. When does it mean king? When does it mean kingdom? Sometimes it means both, right? So you just have to kind of be aware of that. All right, now, what does it tell us about the 4th kingdom that's unique? What does it tell us? Yeah, the 4th beast is different. And when you're studying in that book, that comes up a lot. It's different, it's unique, or it's different, it's different. Okay, and that to me, if it does that, it's different from all of the others in 7:19. And why might he be saying that? Is the question correct? I mean, your question should be at this point, well, why does he make a point of saying about that 4th kingdom that it's different? And the next thing that's important also is to look at observations of these beasts. Did you notice how much time is spent on the 4th beast as opposed to the others? Right, exactly. But the fact that this text spends so much time on that 4th beast tells you it's different and it's something more important about it, that it's unique in a way that we need to understand. Now, when we are looking at the 4th kingdom, we are talking about before Medo-Persia was Babylon, which is where Daniel started his visions, right? So it was Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Yes, that's 4 beasts. Okay, so these are your beasts, and we're talking about the 4th beast right now. And concerning that 4th beast, what kind of information are we gaining about them? Well, we know at this point that 70 weeks were decreed for Daniel and his people. There's 1 week outstanding, one that's left, right? We've already looked and seen that 1 week falls here. And so what does that tell us about this 4th beast? He goes all the way through here. So in the economy of God's writing, this is still Rome, right? This is why, if you've ever heard of it, a lot of people call it revived Rome. Okay, because do we have Rome in place at this point in our history? No. But what does this tell us is going to happen in our world? What's going to happen for us at some point? We're going to have another world power come back into place. And what God says is this, he views it as the 4th beast, as an unending beast. But what has happened is with that 4th beast, we've had a period of time where there's like a break. Gee, just like God did it. There's a break. Even though Rome was here, huh? Yes, there's a gap in history. There's a gap in history. Why the gap? Well, because God has 70 weeks for Daniel's people. He's accomplished 69. The other one we know falls down here because of all the work that we've done so far. But we have a time frame that's called a gap. Jesus in Matthew addresses it, and he says, but there's going to be wars, rumors of wars, famines, and earthquakes, but that's not yet the end. So he addresses that there's a gap. This is our gap. And he says here, the same thing. There are going to be these wars, desolations will occur. Matthew 24 also addresses it. So there is a gap of time between this 69 weeks and the 70th week.
From our video study, though, cuts off that last beast when the rock comes.
He sure will. And when does he do that? When he comes, right? When Jesus comes, he crushes all those kingdoms, right? And that stone becomes a great mountain and fills the whole earth, correct?
So that's not
It's his second coming. So when Jesus comes, and he comes when? Oh, sorry. You're right. I didn't do it. Jesus comes. He comes in the seventh bowl, right? And then what follows? His kingdom. 1,000 years reign of his kingdom. Are you seeing it? Okay. So he will come, and yeah, this will be the stone that crushes. And what does he crush? He crushes all the kingdoms of men. All the world leaders are going to do what? They're all going to come before him and do what? They're going to bow down to him and worship him and serve him, right? So that's when Jesus comes in that seventh bowl, and that's the stone, and the stone becomes a great mountain. That's in Daniel 2, I think it is, right? All right, now, okay, did I answer you?
Yes, I guess I had thought I had always related that to the first one.
Oh, whoops. Yeah, that's a big problem. Because as a matter of fact, what did we just say? And he's going to have nothing here. And this is again, this time right here is again going to be the gap.
So we're living the gap right now.
We are living in the gap.
And doesn't Romans 11 talk about that?
Well, he called, no, not really. It's talking about the grafting in of Jews into the Gentiles into the Jewish privileges, and but that it's a different subject matter totally. It's not talking about this, any of this. Yeah. But it just talks about how do we get into the privilege of being a child of God and receiving the blessings of the eternal blessings that are promised to Israel, that they'll live with God and he will be their king. And, you know, he can't be our king if we're not grafted in. That's what Romans 11 is talking about. Yeah, but that happened, Romans 11 happens during that time frame.
I think one thing is really important to keep our eyes focused on is that this is for the Jews, your people and your holy city, the whole tribulation.
That's exactly right. Yeah, you know what's okay. Now here's another good point for you guys to keep in mind. What Kathleen just said, all of these 70 weeks, they are for the Jews. This is God working out his word to accomplish what he said he would do, in order that, number one, he would vindicate his holy name because they had profaned it among the people. That's what Ezekiel tells us. But also that he will accomplish what he did through them, and then the whole world is going to turn and recognize that he is God and that he does exactly what he says. In the meantime, we have a gap. Right here it addresses it. Right here it addresses it. We see it on the timeline. When we do a timeline, 69 weeks, but then there's a gap before the 70th week comes. This is the time, though, when God deals with the Gentile world. He's accomplished everything that he's done. We have the privilege of looking at what God did with it. It's why we study the Old Testament, right? We go back and we look at all that so that we can see how God, from the beginning of Genesis all the way through, who is God and how does he love man, and to what lengths has God gone to redeem man back from his fallen state, right? And how he used a nation as a demonstration. They're a tool in God's hand. It's why he calls Israel his servant. And it's his servant in order to proclaim who he is to the world. It isn't that Israel is special because they're special people. They're special because they're his tool. And that through them, he shows to all of us who God is and what he's capable of, right? And that he has a plan for us, that he loves us, that he wants us to spend eternity with him. So in looking at all this, what I'm loving is how often this gap is actually mentioned in scripture, and we've always missed it. I just never came to my mind in that there was this gap time. But Jesus warns us there's a gap time.
So in 25, references
what chapter and book? 9? Hold on, 24, 9:25. Okay. Oh yeah. The reason I put the gap there is because we know that from the issuing of a decree until Messiah the Prince is 69 weeks. It was 7 weeks and 62. So, and we know the 70th week doesn't come until all the way down here. So the obvious conclusion is there's a gap, right? Because he stopped at 69 and then he paused. He even says it here. He's saying from the issuing of a decree to rebuild until Messiah the Prince, and then he gives you those 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So we put that on our timeline. And then he says about after that 69 weeks, he says, and then Messiah is going to be cut off, and the prince of the people of the prince who is to come is going to destroy the temple. So he tells us about the cross and Jesus being crucified and not yet receiving his kingdom. And he tells us that the Jewish temple is going to be destroyed, and it was in 70 AD. So we know that all this information right here is about the gap. Okay. All right.
Another thing I think to point out for people is that when we have this in Daniel, the 70 weeks of Daniel, so in what is that?
Yes, 9.
9, that first list about what's supposed to happen in the totality of the 7 weeks.
Right.
Is that big long list of 6
Yeah.
things. And
Right.
we haven't finished.
That's exactly right. So that she's right. She brings that up. Actually, I just skipped by it. Did you notice? I just went right past all that because it talks about that those 70 weeks, in those 70 weeks, he's going to finish the transgression, make an end to sin, make atonement for iniquity, bring in everlasting righteousness, seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Now, that is a whole Bible study all by itself. We can spend hours in there, and each week we can cover one of those points, actually. You can do 7 weeks right there. We're not going to do that today. We're going to skip it. But what he's saying is in these 70 weeks, in the totality of these 69 and this 70th, he is going to accomplish that list that he has given to us there. Okay. But then it says, so you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. I was wondering about that verse. Do I have that in here? Yeah, Luke 19:28. I'm going to give it to you here. Luke 19, it's verse 28 to 44. It's the triumphal entry. This is the one where when Jesus is approaching Jerusalem, he looks upon it and he weeps. We've all heard that sermon, right? And then he says, if you had only known in this day, right? In other words, he's saying to them, you should have known in this day that I would be here. Because Daniel told you that from the issuing of this decree until Messiah the Prince, it would be 69 weeks. They could have figured it out. They should have known he was their king. The problem is what did I tell you last week about what they were wanting in a king? They weren't looking for a key. Right, exactly. They didn't want a savior that would be their king. They wanted a king who would come and be their savior, right? Save them from the mean, awful, horrible people in the world and make them the head again. Okay. All right. So let's go back to 7 now. Pardon? Okay. All right. Daniel 7 now back to, what is the meaning of the 10 horns? Ten kings, and they are going to arise out of the fourth. Yeah, it's of the fourth kingdom. So now you're seeing how all this layers in. Boy, if you haven't done Daniel, you need to go back, and there are so many details on this given to us in the book of Daniel. Then he talks about that's right. These 10 horns are 10 kings, and they're 10 kings of the fourth kingdom. What have we seen over here in our Revelation course about a dragon? And what does he have? 10 horns. Well, over here it talks about that, right? Over here we have the 10 horns and then another. And he subdues and uproots 3. So what is 11 minus 3? 8. So you're going to end it. You're going to start with 10 kings, then it'll become 11 kings, and then it'll end up at the very end as being 8. Does that sound familiar from Revelation? Remember in chapter 17? That was complicated. Let's go back and look at that very fast. I don't want to spend too much time in there, but I think it's 17 is where I want to be. Yeah, starting verse 10. He talks about 7 heads. 5 have fallen, 1 is not yet come. It says, and then there's a beast, which was of also an 8th. Now you know where the 8th comes from. And it's the 7 kingdoms, and he goes to destruction because he's a king that's going to go to destruction, but he's one of the 8 that comes out of the 10 plus 1. Well, what did we learn when we looked at Daniel this week about the one that's added in? Well, in chapter 7, she didn't have you going back there, but go back to chapter 7, verse 8 of Daniel if you have it available anywhere. Maybe I'll just read it to you. How about that? Will that be easier? Okay. Daniel 7, chapter 8, it's talking about the 4 beasts and an everlasting kingdom. That's the title of my chapter. When you get to verse 8, you're talking about the 4th beast again. So we're back to Rome. And it says, and while I was contemplating the horns, behold, the 10 horns, behold, another horn, a little one came up among them. And 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, his horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. And oh, I thought that was the one that gave me his name. Yeah, that was it. And his name is called Little Horn. So this is where you have this one, and another is called Little Horn. Kind of a nice review for those of us who did this, isn't it? Okay, so he's the little horn. He's that additional 1 to the 10, which makes 11, and then he becomes 1 of 8. That's what Daniel or Revelation, rather Revelation 17 is talking about. Okay, and it says in there, and he's 1 of them, and he's the 8th, and he is an 8th. Okay, now he becomes the 8th because he was added on after the others were already there. He uprooted 3, so he's the 8th. Okay, all right, now another king is going to arise. He has a mouth uttering great boasts. What else does he do? Yep, wearing down the saints of the highest one, waging war with the saints. Oh, yep. All right, so you get a long list, and it could get complicated. One of the important things is how he acts. This king is going to do what with the saints? What's going to happen with the saints in verse 25? And the saints are given to him, right? There you go. For him, for times, and 1/2 time, which is how long? 3.5 years. And he does this after he begins to wage war with the saints. When does that happen over here? Yeah, it's going to happen right here when Satan is cast down. And he begins to pursue this poor little woman, right? Called Israel.
Is that what Daniel 12:1 is referencing when it talks about now at that time, which going back to 11 is the time of the head king, that Michael, the great prince, is going to arise, and there's going to be this time of distress?
Yes.
Because that's when we see in
Yes.
chapter 12 of Revelation about the war in heaven and the boot.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. Good job. Did everybody? Okay, say all that again.
Okay. So in Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, it says, now at that time, Michael, the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise, and there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, your people, everyone who's found written in the book, will be rescued. And I asked if what I'm referencing there is when the war in heaven happens and Michael defeats Satan and he gets the boot. And we know that that happens right at this point here. Is that what that's referencing?
Okay, so then you can go back here. This abomination of desolation occurs mid-trib at the three. That's when Satan is cast down here. Let's put it over here. Satan is cast down. That's in the middle of the 3.5 years right there, right? So you got 3.5 and 3.5. And it says, and there is going to be a time from that point forward, it's going to be a time such as has not occurred since the beginning of time. And that matches up then with Daniel. Okay. Ooh, with the good stuff. Yes. The little horn is Antichrist. Yes, correct. Let's put that on here. Antichrist. Okay, I just use AC for Antichrist just to shorten it. But the little horn is Antichrist. He's also called the beast. Okay, it's still the Antichrist. All right. Now the saints are going to be given to him at time times half a time. So that's our time frame there. So everything in Daniel 7 then that's being spoken of about this fourth beast, it goes where on our timeline? Where does Daniel 7 go? It goes in this time frame. So Daniel 7 goes here. Daniel 9, starting where? If you go back to 9, at what point do we put everything down there? How about verse 27, all right? Because everything before that is in the gap, correct? So verse 27, 9:27. Now what happens in 9:27? Let's make a little list here.
Kristen, can you turn the camera a little bit?
Yeah.
Thank you.
What does he say he's going to do in 9:27? Oh, he's going to make a covenant with the many for 1 week. Do you think that might catch your attention if you and I as Christians are still on the face of the earth and we see a coalition of 10 kings come together? One gets the boot, another one rises up as his head. He is now an 8th. And that king, he's going to make a covenant with Israel for 1 week. Ding, ding, ding. What is that going to tell anybody that's watching it that knows what we know? They're going to know they're at the end time and that he's the Antichrist, right? So he will make a covenant with, and I'm going to put the Jews because that's who the many are, with the Jews for 1 week. And how long is 1 week? 7 years. Then what's going to happen? In the middle, he's going to break his promise. He will break the covenant. And then what? So in the middle of this week, he's going to make a covenant for 1 week. In the middle of the week, he's going to break that covenant. It says he's going to put a stop to sacrifice and grain offerings. What does that tell you then about that time frame? There's going to be a temple, and this covenant is going to accomplish what for the Jews? What is the covenant going to be about? Them being allowed to sacrifice at their temple. So he's going to make a covenant with Israel for 1 week. Then in the middle of it, he's going to break his promise and he's going to stop it. That's when it says, and then on the wings of abominations, what? Comes one who does what? Makes desolate. So here In 927, oh, up here, it's got to go up here. I'll put it up here. On wings of abomination, wings of abominations, is one who makes desolate. I know this is getting tight here too. That's in 927. So let's get it over here so you see where it goes on the timeline. On wing of abomination. Comes one. Who's the one? That's right, the Antichrist who makes desolate. Yep. That's exactly right. In the middle, because it's a 1 week covenant, and in the middle of it, he breaks his promise, and then he comes with abominations. So what happens right here? Abomination. And I'm going to add the rest of it, of desolation. Abomination of desolation that occurs right there in the middle. That's when the abomination of desolation takes place. It's in the middle of the week when he breaks that covenant promise. What has happened prior to that? They had been allowed to worship. They had been promised they could. There is a pseudo peace on the land. People are saying peace, peace, but there really is no peace, right? But they're thinking there is. He's gonna make them all kinds of promises. Do you remember when the first horseman comes out, when the seal is broke? He comes basically with a bow. So we talked about him being a negotiator and a politician, so to speak, and making promises, but they're not really, he's not going to follow through with it because that's going to last all of 3.5 years. Not even a full presidential tour, right? And in the middle of that week, he's going to break that promise. Then on the wings of abomination comes that one who makes desolate. That's the desolation of abomination right there. Isn't that amazing? Yes, you can. You are? I will let you.
Daniel about this. I was confused when I rewatched the videos about this. I'm still confused about it.
Okay.
Okay, so he's called the prince who is to come, and then we have he and he stops it, and then it says, and this other thing will come. To me, they're not the same thing. Now, I don't know if that means we're still in
You're in Daniel 9. 27. Okay, and he will make a firm covenant with the many. So he is the Antichrist. In the middle of the week, he will put a stop to grain offerings, the Antichrist. On the wing of abomination comes one who makes desolate, the Antichrist.
Now, I don't know if it's just like because it's not a he anymore. He's changing the name completely to something else, and it's saying that will come, which means he's not here. Now, the only thing that kind of makes sense in my head is at this point is when the devil comes back down. Like the devil is now down here. Is that kind of when?
Who is it that gives the Antichrist his power and his throne?
Well, it's Satan. So I'm wondering if maybe that doesn't happen until this point, and up until this point, he's just a man operating, doing his thing.
Well, there's certainly still going to be demonic influence upon him, just like there is today. One of the things that I find interesting is when we went back and we looked at 11, which we haven't gotten to yet, we got about 30 minutes, we got to be able to do it. But when you get into 11, you see this, hold on, let me do it on this sheet because it's easier for me to see. In 11, verse 3, you begin the Greek Empire. When you hit verse 21, there's this man called a despicable person. And he also commits an act of abomination of desolation, but it's the Greek Empire. So it's not Rome. It's not the end time king, right? Does everybody follow that? Okay. But yet what does he do? All the same kinds of things that the Antichrist is going to do. So what does that tell you about the way Satan is operating even to this day concerning what he hopes to do? What is his plan in all this? What does Satan want to do? He wants to thwart God's plan to come back and establish his kingdom, right? He wants to prove that God is incapable of accomplishing his word to his people. So what we see by doing that is that in every generation, there's an antichrist ready and available at any moment. He could use any man. So it's not about the man, it's about Satan influencing him to do what he really wants him to do when it's time. However, does the man have free will? Every man has free will. So this is a man who, think of all the people on the face of the earth. Think of, okay, I'm going to take an obvious one, Adolf Hitler. Did he hate the Jews? You know, had Satan come down yet? No, but yet, do you think he was satanically motivated and that, I mean, he's an antichrist. This is why 1 John chapter 2 says there are many antichrists in the world. There always have been. He hates Jesus, exactly. So there's a lot of them, and that's why Jesus, he says, and there will be false witnesses, there will be false prophets, there will be false signs and wonders. All these things are going to be taking place, and there are always men who hate God and will accomplish his work. So so this is not switched people. It's still, and the reason we know that is because of all these other things that show us this right here in the same context of chapter 9, 10, and 11 of Daniel. He's talking about the four beasts, specifically about that fourth one who's different, who has 10 horns, and the one called little horn is the one he's really working through. He's going to be the one that rises up as the head of the leadership of that coalition of men. And that's why he's called the eighth. Revelation 17 covers that. But I understand how it's difficult to weave all this together, because you really do have to. I know. Carol's like, yes, it's hard. Carol. I know. I understand that. I do understand it. And I've done it many times, Carol, and I'm just, every time I go through this, just like I've showed you again this morning, how many times have I been in this classroom since we started this, and I say, oh, I learned something new, right? Or I figured something out today. I made this connection of this end time being this gap, and it's stated all these different places, and I never noticed it before. But it's there. It's plain as the nose on my face, but I just missed it because there's a lot of things to keep in place. Also, it isn't ancient history, it's future. So it's not all of it fulfilled. So we're just trying to do the best that we can to plug it in. And I can also tell you, there are plenty of people who would absolutely argue with me and with what Precept has laid out on how this should be. But if you guys know anything about me, if you've been with me for any amount of time, you know that I don't just go along with Precept because Precept says so. There have been times when she teaches things that I disagree, and I explain to you my apologetics concerning how I came to my understanding, and I stand with that. There are things that I see differently. So I'm not just a robot following whatever the curriculum says, this is what it is. I think for myself. They have taught me to do that. I'm so thankful to them for that. And that's what I'm hoping to do with you all. I want you guys to follow the reasoning on how do you get here. That's why I spend all this time with lists, even though a lot of people don't do lists anymore when they teach. But how handy is it to be able to look at that on the board and then make the connection? And then when you timeline it, you can see where things go. And all of a sudden it starts to click. But yes, there's a lot of pieces. And you got to, and because just like when I opened at the beginning, I said, sometimes it's this generation will not pass away. Then they're called the elect. Then they're called the saints, right? There's so many names for these people. And also it depends on context. Which saint are you talking about? Are you talking about the church age saints, or are you talking about the Jewish nation saints? Well, when you're in Revelation, you're talking about the Jewish nation saints.
I was so excited this week. I went to church with my daughter in San Antonio, and the pastor there was, I mean, he started on Genesis, but he was talking about, you know, what we should be doing. And he was like, you need to ask yourself those questions. How, when, what, where.
Yeah, good for you. That is so true. And I think that this kind of apologetics, number one, but also just the in-depth study. We have not been doing this in the church for years and years and years. That's why so many of us, me included, I grew up knowing about the big things, Noah and the ark, you know, and the birth of Jesus and Daniel and the lion's den, but I could not pull a thread and link it back to other things because I didn't have my doctrines. And nobody teaches it like this. And this method does it for you, but you do have to discipline yourself. You just have to. And if you will get out of it as much as you put into it. So if you spend 2 or 3 or 4 hours doing your homework, that's as much as you're going to get. If you spend 30 or 40 hours like I do, you'll get more. Although I'm a very, very slow learner. That's why I keep trying to tell you guys, I'm not saying that to belittle myself, but I'm telling you, I am not an intellect. Ask Lois. Lois, am I an intellect? No. I'm going to put her on the spot. Yeah, but I'm not an intellect. Everybody that knows me knows that. I'm not, I don't just intuitively things come to me and I just get it. I have to work really hard to do what we do here. If I can do it, you can. Everyone can.
Comment about how when you started today, the different names for one person or a group or whatever.
Mhm.
I found it valuable. Else we were supposed to label who, the pronouns all, and she did say to do that at some point.
Yes.
but I thought about that. And I thought, boy, I wish I'd been doing that since day one.
Right, right. Yes. Yes. You absolutely do. So when it comes to the Antichrist at the end time, he's all. What happens when we go into Thessalonians? What's he called there? The man of lawlessness, the son of destruction. Right. He's got a lot of names. Satan has tons of names, right? The devil and Lucifer and what is it called? A light, something about a light. He's a morning star or whatever. Yeah. So there are tons of problems. Yes. Okay. Mhm.
That when it says on the wing of abomination will come, one who makes desolate, that will come is in a different thought. So is that added?
Yeah, he's just saying about this one that I've just been telling, because he's introduced you who he is. He who's going to make this firm covenant. That whole verse is about he who's going to make that covenant.
So I think that's will come. So if you can leave that out because that's not in the original, is that right? The will come? Because it's a different thought. Where are you?
The will come italics generally means it's words that are not in Greek and they put it in there.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. That's a good point. Mine's colored so much I can hardly see it. Well, no, I think what it is again, it's translation from the original language into English. And how many translation Bibles can you buy? And that's why it's really good. And I've taught this many times that it does not hurt for you. If you're having a struggle with identifying something, I love what you did on the last thing we talked about, where you went and you looked up the word flood, just did a word study on it, right? In this case, it would help to compare 2 or 3 different translations to make sure you get it. But you're absolutely right. The will come is added. He's going to be one that's going to, if you read it without it in English, it doesn't flow that well. In the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, semicolon. Do you see that? So it's still speaking about the same person. On the wing of abominations, one who makes desolate. And I think it actually makes better sense without the comes one or will come. I agree with you. If you just eliminate, you could actually take a white highlighter and just highlight it out or white it out. So it's not even in there. On the wing of abominations, one who makes desolate. That same one I was already talking about. Even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So, yeah.
And I think that clears up what you were saying is when it says will come, it sounds like it's different person.
Yeah, but will come shouldn't even be in there. Yeah, I'm gonna mark it out. Just I just did with my black marker. It's gone, erased. Because if that's a complication for you, get rid of it. I don't know, but what I think is important for you to understand is, do you see the semicolon after the word offering? He's in the same flow of thought with the same subject matter.
See, I just thought it was like talking about because it was the middle of the week. I stuck with the middle of the week and then this other thing is coming. So then I got stuck with my middle of the week.
Yeah,
Okay,
no.
I'm good.
No.
I'll-
And also the other thing that's really important is, he's the one who commits the act of abomination. And we've already worked out who that is. That's the one that's described to us in chapter 13 of Revelation. He's the beast who has another beast, and he will make you take his mark. And he's going to be pursuing the woman for 3.5 years. Okay, we got to hurry on. Okay, so we've gone through these Daniel 7 now, I think, pretty well. At the end of this, what happens with the saints? Although they are given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. But what happens at the end? Yeah, judgment is passed against them. And the kingdoms,
Lois lost you.
you lost me, Lois. I was just trying to get down so that I could write. It's hard to write down here. You guys come here, you come write this for me because you might. Okay. Yeah. All right, so we're going to go. Kingdoms are given kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the saints. So kingdoms are given to the saints. Of the highest one, and all dominions will serve and obey God. And now this 27, 9:27. Oh, 7:27. Sorry. Yep. Okay. All right. So that takes care of 7:17 to 28. Any more questions on that portion? That's the most that we needed to know. We just needed to know who this fourth beast was primarily, and that he is attached to that little horn statement back in a previous chapter, chapter 7, verse 8. And that the conclusion of all of this ranting and uprooting and the saints being given into his hand, the outcome of it is going to be that the kingdoms are going to be given to the saints and all dominions will serve and obey God. Does that match with what we see here? What happens when Jesus comes back? He has his kingdom, right? And who will serve him? All dominions, the whole earth. And who is this kingdom given to? And proof text it for me. Tell me where you know you have a verse for that. The saints are gonna be given the dominion, right? What verse do you know? Yes, in Revelation, because that's our. There you go. So that's in Revelation 20, verse 4. So you can cross-reference this with Revelation 20, verse 4. Okay, because that's where it says that all the dominions are going to serve and obey God, and the kingdoms are going to be given to the saints. In Revelation 20, verse 4, it presents two different groups who are called the saints there. One is the bride who's coming with him. The other one are the Jews who are going to be rescued, the nation of Israel, and they're going to serve and obey God, and they're going to be given the kingdom. So it doesn't exclude us just because our primary subject matter is the Jews in Revelation. The Jews are the primary subject matter. But does the church get grafted in? Romans 11? Yes. So we do get to participate in that, but that's not the subject of his point to what we're looking at. Why? Because in Daniel 9, it says in 24, 70 weeks were decreed for Daniel and his people. That's who the subject matter is. So he's giving everything first from the perspective of Israel. But are we going to be there? Yes. But we're not the subject necessarily until chapter 20, where the bride comes with him. That's when we do show up. It's the only place we show up in the whole book of Revelation.
Refresh me on 20.
Well, except for the letters.
Your people in your holy city to finish the transgression.
Right.
The transgression of this.
Okay, again, that's a whole Bible study. We have to go back and, I mean, there's a lot of things about that finishing of the transgression. There's also a putting an end to atonement, everlasting righteousness, sealing up vision and prophecy, anointing the most holy place, a finish to the transgression. Now, I think that's interesting, though, question, and that is, what transgression? What is what of the?
Israel's transgression.
Yes, it has to be Israel's transgression. Yeah. I mean, that's what's cool. That one is a whole long study. Okay, let's go on to 11. I know I've got a very short amount of time, so we're going to talk about this very quickly. We're going to say this is the Greek Empire spoken of. Before it was Medo-Persia, right? And then the last part of it is technically Rome, but they call it end times, right? And this is verses 1 and 2. This is verses 3 to 35. And this is verse 36 to 45. Okay, that gives you your outline for the whole chapter. Are you following me? I hope you all did that for yourself in previous work in Daniel, but if not, that you went back and refreshed your mind. Now, what we see in the Greek Empire presented to us, 3 to 35, and in that we see a despicable person, right? And how is he described, and what is the main thing that he does that is very familiar sounding to us?
So just so you know, he only gave us the Daniel 11:35 to 12:13 observations.
I know that. Right. I just gave you the others so that,
Well, you're asking for that.
well, I don't know how you did your homework without going back and looking at the whole chapter, because you would be lost. You'd be dropping in cold and going, where am I? I hope I've taught you enough. I am going to shake my finger at you if you didn't go back and look at the whole chapter to set the context for yourself before you dove in there. You're really missing. How would you even know where you are? You're dropping into a verse. Some of those who have insight will fall. Who some? What is he talking about? Where am I? Who is that? Right? You have to go back to the whole chapter. Oops. Okay, so, but yes, I'm only going to be covering the part that we are subject on. She starts us with 35. I want to take us back to show us just one thing in this despicable person. It starts in 21 to 35, because 35 is where we start, right? That's the conclusion to what was said about this despicable person. Who is he? What does he do? One of the things he does, though, is he will desecrate the sanctuary. What sanctuary? The temple. And he will set up an abomination. Of desolation. And that's in verse 31, just before you hit this 35 where we started. Yeah, and he does away with sacrifices. In other words, this right here is a foreshadow of the end time?
Put an end to sacrifices before he desecrated his goods.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so now we start in 35 and now we pick up with the end time king. The reason I brought that in though was, again, earlier I had said to you, you always have to be careful when you're comparing apples to apples. If you drop into Daniel chapter 11, you're going to see another despicable man who commits an abomination of desolation. But you could confuse it with the end time king that we're looking at, the Antichrist. But the problem is this one's in the Greek Empire. What empire are we going to be in? We're going to be in Rome, right? End time. And we go on, and it starts right at the beginning of that verse 36. And then meaning following this time frame of the Greek Empire, then we go into the kingdom, which is the fourth beast called Rome, right? And it says, and then the king will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god. He will speak monstrous things against the God of gods, and he will prosper until the indignation is finished, for that which is decreed will be done, right? Dropping down to verse 40, at the end time, then it gives you some maneuvering in there, some strategic things that are taking place, right? Who's going to do what? What are the things that you saw in there that give you a more insight about our end time king called the Antichrist? Anything? Uh-huh.
In 36, it says, until the indignation is finished. That tells you that we are in the end time.
Well, it could be that, but it could also be the rebellion of the Jewish people. But it happens then. Yes, the indignation specifically. Let me look at that. For that which is decreed will be done. Yeah. He will prosper until the indignation is finished. I think his indignation probably, right?
Or is that the transgression?
Or it could be the transgression, which is, yeah. See, it could. Yeah, it could be. We need to do a word study on that, don't we? I wonder if I did on my last time. Hold on, let me go back to 1135, correct? 36. Okay, the indignation. Okay, it's the final period of the indignation, 8:19. Go back to 8:19, somebody. Daniel 8:19. Tell me what it says there. Oh, there it is. So it links the two. The indignation is not the end time, but it pertains to it. It's why the end time events are happening. So this indignation, it pertains to the time of the end. Pertains to its having to do with.
What was the verse again?
That's in 8:19. You can also do 17 and 19 of chapter 8. So then he came near to where I was standing, and when he came, I was frightened and I fell on my face. But he said to me, Son of man, understand that the vision pertains to the time of the end. Now, while he was talking to me, I sank into a deep sleep with my face to the ground. But he touched me and he made me stand upright. I'm wondering, yeah, it's Gabriel. And he said, behold, I am going to let you know what will occur at the final period of the indignation, for it pertains to the appointed time of the end. Right. Well, the tribulation isn't the indignation. I think the indignation is what he's doing. But it happens then. Yes, it pertains to it. Yeah, it happens then. Yes. Yep. Okay, so it's all semantics. Okay, so we see then concerning this end time, It's a time of the indignation. That was in verse 36, right? Of Daniel 11, okay? And I gave you guys Daniel 8. Give me those two verses, 17 to 19. Okay, that'll give you a cross-reference on that. So it's the time of the indignation. This king is going to enter where? The beautiful land. What is that? Mhm. That's going to be Israel. Right? And that's in verse 41. And then it says, at the end time, these kings of south and north of what, by the way? South and north of Israel are going to storm against him. So he's going to have a war with other kings, it looks like. And I liked this one. It says, and many countries will fall. I'm going to put this on here because it's very good. Many countries will fall, but, and then it lists some Edom, Moab, and Ammon. Will be rescued by who? Who's going to make that happen? Will be rescued out of his hand. Now, if this is the same end time king who's going to be pursuing the woman, Israel, as she's fleeing, and she flees to the mountains, and we've got a land called Edom, Moab, and Ammon, and where is it located? Oh my gosh, got a handy dandy map. Good girl. So you might want to look at a map, but Ammon, Moab, and Edom are basically Jordan area. And when that woman flees, she's told to flee to the mountains because she has to leave Israel where this pursuer, the Antichrist, is pursuing her. So where do you think she might be running to? To that area where God is going to rescue, and he's going to rescue them. These are going to be rescued out of the hand of the Antichrist, so that Israel will have a place to flee to. Isn't that interesting? So you might want to put Revelation 12:6 next to this as a cross-reference. And it says there, then he's going to go forth with great wrath to destroy. And then how long is all this going to be going on for? We're into chapter 12 now. Sorry. Moving on to chapter 12. Yeah, for a time, times, and 1/2 time. So where are we on our map again? We're at the end, the last 3.5 years, time, times, and 1/2 a time, which is 3.5 years.
That's 12:7, right?
This is 12. Yeah, yes, 12:7. Thank you. And as soon as, now this was good, as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, who are the holy people? Israel. All these events will be completed. That's what it says in 12:7, right? Go back to Daniel 4:3. Does anybody have their Bible open? I'm going to open it and read it to you because I don't know why I marked it now. I just got to read what I did. 4:3 says, how great are his signs and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom and his dominion is from generation to generation. Why did I put that in there? Oh, 4:37, wrong verse. That's why that wasn't making sense. Okay, now, oh, this is good. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and honor the King of heavens, for all his works are true and his ways are just, and he is able to humble those who walk in pride. So here, that's a cross-reference for you here, because it says as soon as these oppressors, finish shattering the power of the holy people, what is their power? What is the power that God wants to shatter in Israel? Their pride, their rebellion, their rejection of him as their king. So he's going to finish shattering the power of the holy people. Then all these events will be completed. Isn't that awesome? That's Daniel 4:37 as a cross reference. So I'm going to put on here, as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people. Yeah. And he's a demonstration through an individual what God will do for a nation. Yeah, absolutely. Isn't that interesting? God, he works the same in all situations. He's going to do it for a nation because he's using them as a demonstration to the world, but he works in the same manner through people, right? And Nebuchadnezzar was that example. So right here, by the way, do not take this verse in chapter 12:7 lightly, because it explains to you why God is doing that 70th week. Why is the tribulation? Why those 7 years? What is God doing? Why is he doing it? Why? He's shattering the power of the holy people. Their rebellion, their rejection of him as their king, he's shattering that. And he says, and when he's done that, when he's finished shattering the power of the holy people, then all these events will be done. Because what is he going to do? He's going to save all Israel. You could actually take that to Romans 11, 24, something like that, or 26 maybe. I'm guessing. I'm taking a stab at it. But in Romans 11:26, it says his promises are irrevocable. And I think earlier in that passage, like up in maybe 24, it says, in that day he will save all Israel. He will save all Israel. His promises.
Verse 26.
Okay, 26.
Romans 11:26. And so all Israel will be saved.
Okay, and his promises are irrevocable is what? 29?
Yes, 29.
Okay, 26 to 29 then are irrevocable. Wow, when we finally get to Romans 11 as a cross-reference, you're going to already understand it totally. But isn't that cool? What a great cross-referencing with that. Daniel 9, those 7 and 11. The only thing we have left now is Thessalonians. I think I can do it if I don't have to explain too much. 3 minutes. I got to do it in 3 minutes. Okay. Okay. Basically, she wanted you to outline the order of the events of things that are going to go on there, right? What did you see in was your outline? How did you outline what was said there? It really should have basically, I think, 3 points. What is well, we can start with there's going to be a restrainer. That's not the steps, but that's just letting you know a restrainer is restraining, right? Until he is taken out of the way. Correct? Was that verse 8? I think something 7. Okay. I was close considering. All right. Now, so that kind of lays the foundation that he's restraining until it is his time, right? This man of lawlessness is time. And when he comes, the Lord is also going to come. At that time, the Lord is going to slay him. But then it gives you an order, and it starts in verse 3, because it refers back to what? In verse 3, it will not come. What is it? The day of the Lord. Now, do not confuse that with that first phrase, the coming of our Lord, because is the day of the Lord the coming of our Lord? Yes, but there are two different comings of our Lord. Are there not? We have him coming for who? The first coming, he comes in the air and he comes for the church. It's the day of the rapture. Then the second coming is his coming at the end of the age when he will establish his kingdom. Again, there's one of those. He's in the air. We meet him in the air. That's what it says in 1 Thessalonians 4. We only looked at 2. We really should have gone on to 4 as well. See, there's just so many pieces, you guys, and there's only so much you can do in one week of homework. But just understand that when it says it's the day of the Lord. And I would prefer you title it that way rather than his coming, because his coming is conflated into two different kinds of comings, and you have to parse that. So the day of the Lord has come. Let no one deceive you. That day of the Lord will not come unless what? Number 1, what happens? The apostasy first, right? Then what happens after the apostasy? The man of lawlessness. Well, he's there until the restrainer is taken out of the way. The restrainer will be removed. I guess we can make that a number 2 and then a number 3 if you want. Do you want to do 4 parts instead of 3? Remove restrainer. You have to remove the restrainer for the man of lawlessness to come, right? Is revealed. Okay, so I'm going to make that number 2 and this one number 3. Okay, remove restrainer. The apostasy first, that was verse 3. Remove the restrainer, that's going to be verse, is that 7? Still? And then the man of lawlessness is going to be revealed, and that's verse 3 also, correct? Okay. And then, Okay, 3 and 8, because Kristen wants 8 on there. And then the last step, what happens after that? Yeah. Then the Lord will bring to an end that lawless one. By the appearance of his coming. Now, his coming happens in the day of the Lord, right? All right, so there we go. 4, the apostasy, he removes, the restrainer is removed. We don't know, we don't have time to talk this through though. I wanted to kind of teach Thessalonians a little bit, but we don't have time to really do that. Who do you guys think the restrainer is? Okay, okay, okay. I like all those answers. The Holy Spirit obviously is a restrainer. God himself is a restrainer. How does the Holy Spirit operate in the world today? Through the church. So what if it's the church, then who's going to be removed? The church. But the interesting word is this word apostasy. I'm just going to give you one plug. There's a book right here. It's called The Falling Away. It's by Dr. Andy Woods. He goes through and he gives 10 apologetic points as to why this apostasy is not people falling away from their faith, but rather it is the rapture of the church. And if Dr. Andy Woods, he's also really good to listen to on YouTube and stuff. I like him. Okay, he's probably, I listen. Okay, there you go. I like him too. He's good. Now there's still some things that he does I don't agree with always, but that's the way all of them are. You don't agree with everybody. You're not going to agree with me every time either. That's okay. I'm a big girl. Okay, but here's what he says. This is rapture, and it's a physical departure.
He said that's not about the apostasy. After the apostasy.
No, the apostasy, that word apostasy can be translated either a physical removal or a spiritual removal. There are two ways to translate that word, yes. So in this case, now apostasy is used in other passages. Let me give you the other verses you can also look at, though, where there is a spiritual abandoning of people from the faith in the last days. There's lots of them. Hebrews 6:8, Hebrews 10:26, 2 Timothy 3:1. Guess what? Matthew 24:10, right? The one we did this week. 1 John 2:19. Now I gave you 4 or 5 there to look at. Those are scriptures in other places about spiritual apostasy. Okay. But he says this is a falling away that is a physical departure. It can be translated legitimately in that manner. It's just that for years, people have jumped to the conclusion that this apostasy meant to vacate or to put behind your faith. But the problem is you got to look at this passage here from the perspective of what he's answering and addressing. He is telling these people here, I don't want you to be shaken from your composure or disturbed, either by a spirit or a message or a letter, as if it was from us, to the effect that the day of the Lord has come. It's not come. Then he gives you apologetically, he gives to these people, not apologetically, he gives to these people ways they can know for sure that the day of the Lord has not yet come. And the first thing he says, the apostasy has to come first. Now, if he were speaking about people falling away from their faith, we could say it's happened a gazillion million times through the generations. People fall away from faith all the time. The scripture, the whole book of Hebrews is written for the purpose of people don't fall back to the old way. Don't go back to the old temple sacrifices, right? Don't crucify the Lord all over again. What about Judas Iscariot, who committed an act of apostasy? He fell away after 3.5 years of following Christ, right? So apostasies happen, those kinds of apostasies happen all the time. But in this text here, he is writing to these people and saying, don't let it disturb you, because the apostasy has to come first. Don't you know? You're going to be raptured before this man of lawlessness comes on the scene. So if you're raptured, and possibly by that rapture, even the restraining work of the church certainly is removed because of that, and because God then pulls back his hand and allows these 7 years to unfold according to his decreed plan. That restrainer there could be God himself removes his restraining, and now the man of lawlessness is revealed. How is he revealed? A 7-year covenant, and then an abomination that's going to happen. Those things are visible. They are easy to see. People will know it when they happen. This one you're not going to ever see. He's just telling you about it. But he's saying you're going to see this. When this apostasy happens, then the man of lawlessness can be revealed. But the reason you don't need to be disturbed, you haven't been removed yet.
So it's not the removal of the restrainer that will allow the man of lawlessness apostasy, and then the restrainer.
No, the restrainer is removes his restraining work so that the man of lawlessness is then revealed. Okay. I just added that in because somebody wanted it. I would take that out. I would do this. The apostasy, the man of lawlessness, and then the Lord is going to come. Those are the 3 points I had on mine. I wrote up here, the restrainer is restraining until he's taken out of the way. He, the restraining work. Now, how that restraining work is physically in the world, I think it's the church. So I think that the apostasy, we're removed. That's the restrainer in many cases. When we are taken out of here, a lot of that restraining work goes. And then the evil can have full measure because the church isn't going to be here to stop. I mean, what holds back a lot of evil in the world right now today? A lot of the stuff that's going on in our politics even today. It's the good people who love God who are restraining them, right? And when that restrainer is removed, when the apostasy, quote, rapture occurs, then the man of lawlessness is going to be revealed. But until we're removed, that man of lawlessness is not going to come. And that's what he's saying to these believers. You don't have to be disturbed. This has to happen first. That's what this book is all about. So if you want a really good dive into it, he takes you into word study. He gives you he's a little bit wordy like me. And so it gets a little complicated, but I found it very, very helpful. And once I was done looking at his 10 points of apologetically explaining why that apostasy is the rapture, and I went, you know what, the early church, do you guys realize the early church always taught the rapture happens before the 7 years? The early church taught that. That was their standard. We didn't switch it until later in history. So here, if this word could have been said, the rapture happens first. And if you think about it in the context of 2 Thessalonians, what else is in the writings of Thessalonians? 1 Thessalonians 4, the rapture of the church. He's already told you about it. So he mentions it here. He just instead of the catching up, he calls it the apostasy, the departure. It's a departure. It's a physical departure. Not a spiritual departure. So that's all my teaching. Thank you guys. Woohoo! That was a lot. Yeah. Bye, you guys. See you later.